So in some ways, I think you're familiar with this, but I'm just giving it as sort of a survey of where the different parts of the brain actually come from. So it all starts with this neural plate, basically, which originates from the ectoderm, which is also the part of the germinal layers in the early fetus, which gives rise to the skin. So it's sort of all the border, and in some ways, many people do consider the skin also as part of the nervous system, because it is really an active surface that we can use to sense the external world, and we can use it to communicate in many ways with the external world. And in some ways it makes sense that it sort of originates from there. Certainly the nervous system developed from the surface of primitive animals because it's all about communication with the external world and activation of muscles in order to move around in the external world when we're talking about the nervous system. The other layers, the endoderm, the mesoderm, give rise to the rest of the body. The endoderm mainly the internal organs, the mesoderm mainly the muscle and the connective tissue. The different stages of development, mainly the formation of the neural tube, is all basically determined by genetic programs which will run automatically during the first parts of pregnancy. I like this table, which very nicely shows how the different parts of the brain develops into the different parts that we are familiar with in the adult brain. So in this way, the various stupid Latin and Greek names make some kind of sense in order to put the different names in connection with each other. The different developments of the different parts of the brain, as I said, are determined to a very large extent by genetic programs which define which part of the brain should develop into whatever structure eventually. So that there is, from the beginning, a very close or a very well-defined genetic program which is running, which is also what determines to a very large extent the production of the different nerve cells. So if we just look at the number of neurons, which sort of goes back to what we started out talking about, the size of the brain, in early pregnancy we have about 250,000 neurons which are made every minute. So it's a huge production of nerve cells, which basically originate all from the ectoderm, the neural plate, and where this structure is relatively quickly being formed within relatively short time. The number of neurons, I mean, this is in many ways stupid information. It's just to give you this impression that there are so many connections that we can't even really comprehend how many there is. The one that I really like the most is that if you look at the number, the turnover basically, in terms of how many connections between the different nerve cells are being formed or destroyed, which is not only during pregnancy, but basically throughout our life. It's a huge amount of activity which is going on. So it's about 1 million synapses which are being made or removed every second basically in our nervous system. So this is a high number, and the reason why I'm somewhat fascinated by this is that it's calling for a lot of metabolism in the brain, which has been overlooked for a very, very long time. It's still in very many of the textbooks, the standard textbooks that we have in physiology or in neuroscience stated that all the brain basically needs is a little bit of oxygen and a little bit of glucose, and then it's going. And this is sort of right, because that's all about just the metabolism in terms of fuel, energy, etc. And that's okay. It's true that the brain cannot use proteins, it cannot use fat in order to produce energy. It needs glucose, and therefore it's eating a lot of glucose and it's taking in a lot of oxygen, and it's sensitive if there is not enough glucose or enough oxygen. But it doesn't actually mean that it's not a metabolic organism which is changing all the time. And this has been overlooked, because it's not very long ago that we didn't realize how much the brain is actually changing throughout the lifetime, and especially early on, which means that in order to make all of these connections, to make all of these neurons, which are constantly being turned over, we definitely need some metabolites which can be built into the brain and help to make all of these connections. So having 1 million synapses which are changed every second, or 250,000 neurons being made every minute during pregnancy, it really means that the mother, the child, especially during the early feeding period, needs a lot of the nutrients which are necessary in order to make all of these neurons. And therefore it's of interest to look at what are neurons actually made of, and what are the kind of substances, the kind of nutrients that the brain needs during development. Because if it doesn't get those things, then the brain won't develop the way it should. This is a thing which has been completely overlooked until relatively recently. So still at this institute, what you will see if you were taking the other course which is running right now, which is all on human nutrition, there's no mention of the brain. And from my point of view, this is, from also a metabolic point of view, probably the most interesting. And especially if you're going to be pregnant and you're going to have a child, you need to think a little bit about what should I eat in order to make sure that the child that I'm going to give birth to actually gets the nutrients that it needs in order to develop correctly. And there are things which we now know are really essential in order to ensure normal brain development at this point. It's, for instance, a substance like zinc. We didn't realize this until relatively soon. It's not really a concern in Denmark, because if you just make sure to eat normal food, you will get good coverage of zinc. But on a world basis, it's a huge problem. About probably 2 to 3 million children are born each year with severe brain damage due to lack of zinc in the food of many third world countries. So on a world scale basis, it's a huge problem. In this country, what we're mostly worried about is that a large part of the brain is made out of, as you probably know, no real surprise, out of fat. The brain is a hugely fatty tissue, so it needs some of those fats. And some of those we cannot make ourselves, so we have to eat them. And some of these are omega-3 acids, fatty acids, like, for instance, docosahexaenic acid, so DHA, which we basically only get from fish. And this is a concern because we have started eating less and less fish over the past 20 years or so. And we've ended up having such a low consumption of fish that we're actually basically lacking DHA, which really means that there is a concern now. And it has been suggested, and it's probably going to come through during the next year or so, to add DHA to different types of food, also here in Denmark. It's already done in other European countries. It's considered now to make it general suggestion for women who are pregnant to make sure to eat more fish oil in order to ensure that there is sufficient DHA, and especially during the breastfeeding period to make sure that the child gets sufficient DHA, because this is probably one of the most important ingredients that we need in order to develop a normal brain. So all of this, I think the main communication of this, forget about all the numbers, just remember it's quite impressive. The important thing there is that all of that change that we see there requires nutrients. And we've only started studying this. So we have maybe a handful of different substances that we know are important for normal brain development. But it's such a new research field that we've only really started learning about it. So those 5 nutrients probably within the next couple of years will be supplemented by another 5, and then another 5, and another 5. And God knows where we're ending up. It is a problem. We just don't know how big the problem is, but it's something that we definitely need to look into. We know for certain, for instance, also now that vitamin D is really essential for normal brain development also. In all likelihood, most women who are giving birth are relatively deficient in vitamin D when living in this country. We've thought in the past that vitamin D was mainly important for bones, but now it turns out that the brain needs quite a lot of vitamin D, especially during this rapid growth period. So it's again one thing that we probably will need to consider in the future.